What's up, everyone? Today is the 21st of January, 2026. Yesterday, President Donald Trump and his trustworthy Air Force One aircraft were forced to turn around after takeoff and return to the airbase, where he had to board a second plane to reach his destination in Switzerland. Now, this wasn't a really big news story. In fact, there's a good chance you probably didn't even hear about it. However, this is a perfect opportunity to discuss some history here today. In particular, the Donald Trump plane crash riddle that has been playing out since even before he was born, as this story is absolutely a numerical extension of that. It was an electrical issue that forced Air Force One to return to Joint Base Andrews yesterday, as Trump was departing for Davos in Switzerland to meet up with the World Economic Forum. In this video, we'll explain how this story is a numerical riddle, of course, connected to the president, Donald Trump, and the Air Force One aircraft that he flew on. Now, Donald Trump has been connected to plane crashes throughout his entire life. In New York City, he owns the building called 40 Wall Street, which is now called the Trump Building. And this is a very intriguing building for Trump to own because this tower right here is one of two skyscrapers in New York City to have a small plane crash into them prior to the attacks of September 11th, 2001. The other New York skyscraper that was struck by a small airplane, both of these events happening in the 1940s, was the Empire State Building, perhaps New York's most famous skyscraper, and a building that was the tallest building in the world at one point. In 1945, a B-25 Mitchell bomber crashed into the Empire State Building, causing tremendous damage. And less than 1 year later, another airplane, a Beechcraft single-engine plane, crashed into 40 Wall Street, which is now the Trump Building. And then, of course, in 2001, the Twin Towers were destroyed by a pair of airplanes, in addition to the collapse of a third tower. So we're going to talk about how all of this is connected, and we'll even be glancing at the numerology of the film Air Force One from 1997. The first president to ever board an airplane was Teddy Roosevelt, and I haven't really discussed him much on this channel, if ever. But he is a very important character in American history. You could even say that he is on the Mount Rushmore of American presidents. And by that I mean he literally is on Mount Rushmore. Teddy Roosevelt's face there, second from the right. Now, when Teddy Roosevelt flew on an airplane, it's important to understand it was not Air Force One. This was after he left office. The first president to actually fly aboard Air Force One was his fifth cousin, Franklin Roosevelt. And we'll glance at his numerology as well. But this story primarily focuses on Teddy Roosevelt and his flight's huge numerical connections to what happened yesterday with this sudden electrical issue aboard Air Force One. Let's start with a little bit of history and discuss some of the numbers that sort of prove that there's something deeper going on here. Now, first, we'll look at this Empire State Building crash, which was on the 28th of July in the year 1945. That date can be written as 28/7, as it is in most parts of the world. This is very similar to the Latin Gematria of Trump's full name, this cipher called Latin or Agrippa's key, one I teach in every video, and I think it's the most important. So Trump's name matches the date of this crash, but there's a lot more intriguing facts about it. First, notice how the plane that crashed into it was a B-25 Mitchell bomber. The number 25 stands out because nowadays, the airplane used for Air Force One is a Boeing VC-25. In standard reduction gematria, one of the base 4 methods, also called Pythagorean, the last name Trump equals 25. The 1946 plane crash into 40 Wall Street, the skyscraper that Trump now owns, happened on the date 20/5, the 20th of May. That crash happened 25 days before the birth of Donald Trump. When the World Trade Center officially opened on April 4th of 1973, that was 250 days after the anniversary of the Empire State crash. The Empire State crash happened a span of 20,500 days before the 9/11 terror attacks, when 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center. Now, the 25th prime number is 97, and this brings us back to the alphabetic order, the simplest cipher in gematria, where the phrase plane crash equals 97. This brings us to Teddy Roosevelt, who would have been he died 9,700 days before the Empire State Building crash, 9,997 days before the 40 Wall Street crash, and on yesterday's date for Trump's incident, Teddy died 39,097 days before that date. So again, 97, the 25th prime number, and 25, the primary number that's been coded with Trump and plane crashes since before he was born. Donald Trump was also born a span of exactly 46 weeks after the 1945 Empire State Building crash. 46 is the ordinal gematria of WTC, the initials of the World Trade Center. Furthermore, the tower's nickname, the Twin Towers, sums to 199, which is the 46th prime number. So with this in mind, we're going to talk about the numerology of this plane crash, or not the crash, but Trump's electrical issue yesterday. And in the second part of this video, we'll even talk about how this is part of the large skull and bones riddle that's been playing out for many years now. Back in the year 2023, the home of Skull and Bones, Yale University, turned 322 years old. Measuring from this special anniversary to the date of yesterday's incident was 119 weeks and 1 day. Not to mention, this problem also occurred 1 day after the date 119. These are the same digits found in the date of the 9/11 attacks. Yesterday was 18 weeks and 5 days after the date September 11th. In ordinal, Donald John Trump sums to 185. In reverse, Trump Building is 185. This is also the value of World Trade Center in ordinal. And of course, Solomon's Temple and the Second Temple are the 2 towers commemorated on the Jewish holiday Tisha B'Av, which is celebrated on the 9th day of the 11th month on the civil calendar. The phrase Tisha B'Av sums to 9/11. And this also works in the Gregorian calendar. The date written 1109, November 9th, equals 1109 in Latin. We're also going to be looking a little bit at the dates on which these 2 other New York skyscrapers first opened. 40 Wall Street, now the Trump Building, opened in 1930 on the date May 1st. And the following year, on May 1st of 1931, is when the Empire State Building opened. And quick correction, 40 Wall Street was actually May 26th for the opening. That's all we're looking at here is the opening dates of these towers. Now, if you measure from the opening of 40 Wall Street to the 9/11 attacks, you get 71 years, 109 days. Measuring instead from the opening of the Empire State Building to the 9/11 attacks, you get 70 years and 19 weeks. This sequence of digits is very intriguing because 7109 is the 911th prime number, whereas 7019 is the 903rd prime number. And consider how on the date 9/11, the second plane struck the South Tower just as the clock struck 9:03 a.m. And of course, there was a lot of 93 on 9/11. We had Flight 93 crash in Shanksville. The other plane that struck the World Trade Center even hit the 93rd floor. So of course, there's a lot more to that, but focusing on yesterday's news and how this connects to the same riddle. Yesterday's grounding of Air Force One was exactly 1,271 weeks after the September 11th attacks. Using triangular numbers, the word skyscraper equals 1,271. And when the first ever skyscraper was hit by an airplane in 1945, it was 12,710 days after Teddy Roosevelt's first flight on an airplane. Again, back in 1910, Teddy Roosevelt, right here, the first ever U.S. president to fly on an aircraft. And these digits right here are very special to Teddy Roosevelt because he was born on the 27th of October, which is the date written 27/10. A sequence we find in both of these measurements. And look at how old Teddy was when he first boarded an airplane. He was 2,710 weeks old. In numerology, 2710 represents the number 271, as zeros are customarily ignored. 271 is the 58th prime number. The name Donald John Trump equals 580. When a plane crashed into the Trump building in 1946, it struck the 58th floor. 58 is the reduction gematria of Solomon's Temple, Second Temple, which is also called Herod's Temple, and also Third Temple is 58, which is one day hoped to be built in Jerusalem, another 58, also matching Twin Towers. When the Twin Towers opened, Teddy would have been 5 months, 8 days after his birthday. And 58 is the ordinal gematria of the name Teddy. Donald Trump was born 5 months and 8 days after the date January 6th, which is when Teddy Roosevelt passed away. The inverse of 58 is 85, and yesterday's news fell 85 days after Teddy's birthday, reminding us of how Donald Trump was born on a date with 85 numerology. Now, next up, I want to take a glance here at a cipher called Satanic Gematria, which is a very unique and special cipher in Gematria, as this is constructed particularly around the number 666. As you can see, the phrase Satanic Gematria equals the number of the beast in this cipher. Notice how the phrase plane crash equals 523 in reverse Satanic. Yesterday was 5 months and 23 days after the date of the Empire State Building crash. And when a plane crashed into the Empire State Building, It was a span of 5,203 days after the building first opened. Donald Trump was born 5,523 days after that same opening date. And in regular Satanic, the name Donald Trump equals 523. This is the 99th prime number, matching the name Donald with capital letters. The Empire State Crash was even on a date with primary numerology of 99, which is a very important number to New York City, New York, which equals 99 and 909 Satanic. If you measure from the Empire State Building's opening date to yesterday's Air Force One grounding, notice how the number of days ends in 99, while it begins with 345. Well, yesterday was the date leaving 345 days in the year. But there's more alignments to the Empire State Building that stood out. First of all, notice how yesterday was 115 years and 101 days after Teddy Roosevelt's first airplane flight. In reduction, Empire State Building equals 115 and 101. And yesterday was also 101 days before the anniversary of the Empire State Building. Tuesday was also a span of exactly 101 months after the first Great American total solar eclipse, also called the Skull and Bones eclipses. Yesterday was also 29,101 days after the crash into 40 Wall Street. And isn't it interesting that the phrase skyscraper crash equals 1001? Kind of reminding us of how the two towers stood in the shape of a number 11. This is basically identical to the Latin value of Roosevelt, which is 1100 in the same cipher. So to bring this together, let's talk about the actual digits 9/11. For starters, yesterday was exactly 653 lunar phases after the opening of the World Trade Center. A lunar phase, or a synodic month, measures the time between each new moon, 29.5 days. Yesterday was also a span of 653 days after the second Skull and Bones eclipse over the United States. Well, 653 is the 119th prime number. Donald Trump was born 119 days before October 11th, which was the date of Teddy Roosevelt's first flight. The name Donald equals 119 in Latin. But here's the real kicker, guys. When Teddy Roosevelt first flew in an airplane, it was exactly 90 years, 11 months before the 9/11 attacks. That same measurement is also 1,091 months. So both of these have the same digits in 9/11. You know, I've always said that our history has been scripted for centuries, and this does appear to be the case, doesn't it? The Twin Towers 1106, WTC, and September 11th, both 6/11 in Gematria. These two skyscrapers, 40 Wall Street and the Empire State Building, which both suffered plane crashes in the mid-40s, these two buildings were opened a span of 11 months and 6 days apart from one another. In fact, the crash into the present-day Trump building was 191 months after it opened. And look at how old Teddy Roosevelt would have been for 9/11. Exactly 1,910 sidereal months. The sidereal month is the other lunar measurement, measuring the time it takes for the moon to orbit the Earth in relation to the stars. And just look at Teddy Roosevelt's age when he died. 60 years, 10 weeks, and 1 day. Like an upside down 119. The Empire State Building even opened a span of 116 days after the date of his death. The number 911 is the 156th prime number, while 156th is the 119th composite number. So this 156 is always significant in the 911 code. The Empire State plane crash happened on the date leaving 156 days in the year. And check out the gematria. Plane collision. Plane, both 156. New York, and Twin Towers, both 156. Even the city of Washington, which is near the Pentagon, which was struck on 9/11, 156. And of course, Donald J. Trump with this value in Sumerian as well. So Donald Trump was born exactly 789 weeks after the opening of the Empire State Building. Notice how this number is found in the gematria of September 11th. But more intriguing to me is that these are the same digits found in the planet Mercury. In Roman mythology, Mercury is the god of transportation, the god of travelers, boundaries. And this is really like the Twin Towers god, so to speak, right? God of commerce, messaging. Remember, the Twin Towers had large antenna on top of them. Financial gain, there was a lot of business going on there. And of course, trickery, as the 9/11 attacks contained a lot of that by a lot of thieves in the government. So Mercury equals 798 in Latin. Well, check this out. Yesterday was exactly 79 years and 8 months after the plane crash into the Trump building. That's also 956 months, which is airplane crash in trigonal. So next up, let's talk about the Skull and Bones Code. And I see a couple questions in the chat. I'll address those at the end of this video if you guys don't mind. So Yale University, Skull and Bones, both connect to the number 48. Donald Trump equals 48 in reduction. And he's often called the wall president. Remember, he first campaigned on building a wall at the southern border. And now he's currently feuding with Tim Walz in Minnesota. The 48th prime number is 223, which brings us to the gematria of plane, 48 and 223. But of course, the 223 connects to the skull and crossbones, or order 322. Notice how Air Force One has gematria of 109, which points to Yale's founding date, October 9th, or 10-9. And like I mentioned at the top of the video, yesterday's incident was 119 weeks and 1 day after Yale's 322nd anniversary. But really, the numbers 223 and 322 are heavily, heavily coded into the 1940s plane crashes in New York City at 40 Wall and the Empire State Building. First, we point out how Teddy Roosevelt's initial flight in an airplane was 20 years, 203 days before the Empire State Building opened. The crash into the Trump building in 1946 was 20,203 days before the 9/11 attacks. and also 3 months, 22 days before the date, September 11th. This crash was also 322 months before the World Trade Center opened. Collapse of the World Trade Center and the World Trade Center both have gematria of 322. And if you measure from the Empire State Building plane crash in 1945 to the birth of Donald Trump the following year, you get a span of 322 days. The name Donald has gematria of 223 and 322. The name Donald Trump equals 589 in Latin. Well, the numbers 223 and 322 both also equal 589. World Trade Center equals 589 with prime numbers, and look at how old Donald Trump was when the World Trade Center was destroyed. 55 years and 89 days of age. There's a nice pi riddle in here as well. Never forget, guys, when the book Life of Pi was first published, it was on the date September 11th of 2001. This popular book would later be turned into a major Hollywood film, released in 2012. But what are the odds that we get this major Pi book, right, published on the same date as the 9/11 attacks? Well, check this out. Teddy Roosevelt died at the age of 3,140 weeks old. 314, the first 3 digits of pi. When you write out 3.14 in Latin, you get a value of 888. And Roosevelt's death was also a span of 8 years, 88 days after his first flight. Pi and the mathematics of the circle are very integral to this skull and bones code. Notice how circle equals 223 and 322. The name Roosevelt equals 223, while his first name Teddy sums to the 223rd prime number. That prime number is 1409, which shares digits with skull and bones, 149 ordinal. Now, there's another significant prime connection here because the 149th prime number is 859. That's the standard gematria of Donald J. Trump. And when the Trump building first opened in 1930, Teddy Roosevelt was exactly 859 months old. That's also 885 lunar phases, which brings us to skull and crossbones. So, I mean, this is one of those perfect examples when you look back through history, just how heavily coded our society has always been. Now, using capital letters, a cipher that adds 26 for every capital letter in the phrase, Air Force One sums to 187. When the Empire State Building opened, it was 187 days after Teddy Roosevelt's birthday and exactly 187 lunar phases before Donald Trump was born. 187. A lot of you recognize this as the homicide code. Well, in ordinal, the nickname for skull and bones, the Brotherhood of Death. Brotherhood of Death equals 187. The Brotherhood of Death equals 220. And yesterday was 220 days after the birthday of Donald John Trump, whose name equals 220. With capital letters, September 11th equals 220. But that's not all. If you instead write out September the 11th, you also get the 220th prime number, 1373. That's a lot like Teddy Roosevelt's age when the Twin Towers opened. He was 1,373 months, but there's more to this measurement. It's a very important number, actually. When the World Trade Center first opened in 1973, Teddy Roosevelt would have been 159 days after his birthday. 159 is found in the Gematria of the World Trade Center, September 11th, and WTC. The Empire State Building plane crash was exactly 15 years and 9 weeks after the Trump building first opened. And when Trump was born, it was 159 days after the date Teddy Roosevelt died. The name Donald Trump is 159, while the name Trump is 1590. Teddy Roosevelt was president number 26. And when you write out the number 26, it equals 159 in ordinal. Now, this actually ties into this next part of the video, I believe. Let's see if my memory serves me correctly. Yes, okay, so the name Jesus Christ equals 159 in the Latin ordinal cipher. And I don't normally use this cipher because it creates a lot of coincidental overlap with the ordinal methods, but it is relevant. And I think this helps prove it. Because not only do you have 159 in Latin ordinal, but in the standard Latin extended method, Jesus Christ equals 1275. And this is the big number to pay attention to right now. Because just a few days ago, we started Brown lunation number 1275. And Brown lunation 1275 is also Millennium lunation number 322. So this current moon that's in the sky, it's the 322nd new moon since the turn of the century. And it's also the 1275th moon since we started counting them back in 1923, when we were assigned lunation number 1. So this flight yesterday was under lunation 1275, like Jesus Christ. Yesterday also had numerology of 13 and 31. Donald Trump was born a span of 13,031 days after Teddy Roosevelt's flight. That's the value of Jesus the Messiah in Latin, 1331. And of course, 1331, the ultimate eclipse number. A riddle so deep, so undeniable, it may actually have the true date of the crucifixion encoded in it. I know that sounds crazy, but I'll try to remember to link this post for those of you who haven't seen it. There's something extremely mystical about the number 1331. Now, if you just write out the name Jesus, notice how you get standard gematria of 515. And surprisingly, this is not a cipher that's come up lately, but it's another huge extended method. Teddy Roosevelt was exactly 51 years and 50 weeks old for his first flight. And it's perfect because the last name Roosevelt also equals 515. The World Trade Center stands on Manhattan Island, which is 151 like Manhattan. WTC 151. Teddy Roosevelt's first flight was during Brown lunation negative 151. And he was born 1,051 months before Donald Trump, who yesterday was on his way to the country of Switzerland which has matching 151 gematria with Jesus Christ. Also notice how they share gematria of 146. I might whiff on this measurement, but I think there's something to it. Let me see. Yes, so yesterday was 10,406 days after the release of the movie Air Force One with Harrison Ford. And remember how that movie came out in the year 1997? This is all about New York City, which equals 1997. Also, if you look at the first president who officially flew on Air Force One, FDR, notice how Air Force One came out 19,097 days after the death of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And again, Franklin Roosevelt, the first president officially on Air Force One. So that's not a coincidence. No way. Trump was also on his way to go to the World Economic Forum, which matches Theodore Roosevelt Jr. in Gematria. Looking back at this movie, Air Force One, there's a couple other measurements I want to point out that tie into everything I just discussed. So if you look at Harrison Ford and measure from his birthday to Teddy Roosevelt's, let's see, when was good old Teddy born? 1858. Oh, here it is. It's 1,119 sidereal months and 1 day apart. Harrison Ford to Teddy Roosevelt. So that seems like a tribute to the 9/11 coding. If you instead look at the date of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first flight, notice how it's been 1,109 sidereal months since then. FDR's first flight was on the date 1/11, which reminds us of how 9/11 is the date that leaves 111 days in the year. The movie Air Force One even came out. Let's see. 1,160 sidereal months after Teddy Roosevelt's first flight. So no matter what you measure to, it feels like you get a 9/11 or an upside down 9/11 with these measurements. Now, the last number I want to talk about before I sign off today and take a look at the chat is the number 226. Now, of course, we just entered the year 2026. In standard gematria, the word sacrifice equals 226. But yeah, airplane crash, 226 as well. And I want to talk about this number on the calendar. So when Teddy Roosevelt had his first ever Air Force One flight, notice how he died 2 months and 26 days after the date of that flight. The opening of 40 Wall Street, which is now the Trump building, that was a span of 226 days before the date Teddy Roosevelt died. The crash into 40 Wall Street was 22 weeks and 6 days before Teddy Roosevelt's birthday. And then when Donald Trump was born, let's see. Donald Trump was born a span of 22 weeks and 6 days after the date Teddy Roosevelt died. When the World Trade Center opened in 1973, it was a span of 22 weeks and 6 days after Teddy Roosevelt's birthday. And then remember how we had the World Trade Center bombing on February 26th, or the date 2/26. The attacks of September 11th happened 22 weeks and 6 days after the opening date of the World Trade Center. So normally I would have built graphics for this, but there's just so much 226 here. And given that we just entered the year 2026 and airplane crash, obviously last year was the year that we had the most airplane crashes in the media anyway. I think that had a lot to do with the fact that last year was the year 25. And again, plane crash is the 25th prime number. And 25 was the huge number that we started the video off with, explaining how the history of skyscraper crashes is all synced up with this number right here. Yeah, so, okay, guys, just glancing at the chat, asking about the Julian calendar in relation to the Gregorian calendar. So this is actually a pretty complicated question. What I've discovered in my near decade now of decoding is that generally you don't need to convert the dates to get a relevant measurement. So let's say if we go all the way back to like the 1400s or something. Now that's when the Julian calendar was in use. But a lot of the times when we're given dates for particular events back during that time, it doesn't convert the date to Gregorian. It just tells us what date it was observed as at the time. And what I found is that if you just punch that in, even though it's not the same number of dates in real life, that the Gregorian date is very significant. I know it's really confusing. Maybe I should write something out and give more thought into this before I answer this question. But let's take, for instance, the 1331 eclipse, right? So that was on November 30th of 1331. However, had they been using the Gregorian calendar that year, it would have actually been December 8th of 1331. Now, recently, I talked about the return of Philip Rivers to the NFL and how this is connected to the white horse theme with Pope Leo. And notice how Philip Rivers was born on December 8th of 1981. So Philip was born exactly 650 years after that eclipse. And he's playing for the Colts, the white horse. White is 65, so is horse. So this is an example of where you would convert the date to Gregorian and still get a very relevant measurement. However, I have countless posts where I've measured to November 30th without converting it and still yielded very significant results. A great example of this, I did a decode on Fleetwood Mac. I think this was in 2022 because Christine McVie died on November 30th. And notice how her death was exactly 691 years after that special eclipse of the sun. And eclipse of the sun equals 691, like masonry. And this post talks about the big Masonic riddle, the Society of Jesus, the eclipse code for Christy McVie. So here I did not convert the date to Gregorian, and it still made a lot of sense. So this one, I guess it's open to a little bit of interpretation. Yeah, I would say you could either convert it or don't convert it. Just, It's, yeah. This is a complex practice. We're still figuring things out. And, I hate to tell you guys certain rules when, I'm not necessarily the authority on this. Did I ever get into alchemy symbols? It definitely fits in with Gematria. I mean, when you look at Gematria, guys, you guys got to understand that this practice here, I mean, we call it numerology, we call it Gematria, but it truly is a symbolic practice. These numbers are symbols. If you think about it, numbers are a complete figment of the human imagination. They do not exist in the outside world of reality. Things occur in numbers. Things occur a certain number of days apart sometimes, but you can't find the number 3 in nature, or like a 47. Like these are things that humans made up. Therefore, they only exist in our consciousness. And when life is breathed into symbols in our consciousness, they form a life of their own and essentially take action within the organic matrix we're in. So when people draw symbols and put certain energy into it, it's sort of similar to what people are doing with numerology when they get excited about a particular numerical match. These numbers are glyphs. They are symbols. So again, it's essentially the same practice. It's using our conscious imagination to build links in reality, which the way reality is designed will come back to us in confirmation. So gematria is a piece of the puzzle. Symbols are. Astrology, physiognomy, even a whole bunch of different things all tied into this. Last thing before I go is if you want to learn more about the World Trade Center and some intriguing numerology, I just did a post on the Wu-Tang Clan, a hip-hop group whose initials are WTC, just like World Trade Center. And in the year 1997, they released this music video with the Wu-Tang Clan symbol over the World Trade Center. And that song came out on 1/11 of 1997, like New York and New York City. So I did this post on the Wu-Tang Clan and the death of Old Dirty Bastard and how it's completely synced up to 9/11. So this post is also linked down below in the description. Check that out if you're hungry for a little more numerology. But for me, that's going to do it for today. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Again, check the links in the description for more. If you'd like to support the work, like, share, subscribe, or join Gematrinator.com. Help support the site. Help support my work. Also, check out our new astronumeric software, which already is helping to bring decoding into the future. Peace, love, God bless. We'll talk to y'all next time. See ya.